The iron shackles bit into her wrists as Beatrice Morgan stood on the wooden platform, dirt clinging to her torn callow dress while a crowd of rough men gathered below, their eyes calculating her worth like she was nothing more than livestock. The trading post in Sheridan, Wyoming smelled of whiskey, tobacco, and desperation on this scorching afternoon in July 1878, and Beatrice tried to keep her chin high even as her heart hammered against her ribs with a terror she refused to show. "What am I bid for this fine specimen?" The auctioneer shouted, his voice carrying across the dusty square. Young, strong, got all her teeth, perfect for cooking, cleaning, whatever else a man might need on a cold night. Beatrice's stomach turned at the leering laughter that rippled through the crowd. 3 weeks ago, she had been traveling west with her father to start a new life in California after her mother's death back in Philadelphia. Then the fever took him somewhere outside Fort Laramie, and she had buried him alone on the prairie with nothing but a wooden cross and her grief. She had made it as far as Sheridan before her money ran out, and the trading post owner, a cruel man named Silas Vetch, had offered her work only to drug her evening meal and forge papers claiming she owed him an impossible debt. Now here she stood, being sold to settle accounts that never existed. $50, called a voice from the back, belonging to a grizzled prospector with stained teeth. 75, countered a rancher she recognized from the saloon, a man whose wife had died the previous winter and whose reputation for brutality toward his workers was well known. Beatrice's eyes burned, but she would not cry. She would not give them that satisfaction. She scanned the crowd, looking for any face that might show mercy, but saw only greed and hunger. The sun beat down mercilessly, making sweat trickle down her spine beneath the thin fabric of her dress. $100, said a third man, this one wearing a suit despite the heat, a businessman from back east looking to establish himself in Wyoming territory. The auctioneer grinned, revealing gaps in his own yellowed teeth. "Now we are getting somewhere. Do I hear 125? 150, the rancher called out, his voice firm with determination. Beatrice felt her knees weaken. She knew that man, knew the stories the women in town whispered about his cruelty. Death on the prairie would be preferable to whatever life awaited her in his house. She pulled against the shackles instinctively, the metal cutting deeper into her already raw skin. "Going once at $150, the auctioneer began. $250. The new voice cut through the noise like a blade, deep and steady and completely assured. Beatrice's gaze snapped to the source and found a tall cowboy standing at the edge of the crowd, his hat pulled low but not low enough to hide the sharp angles of his jaw or the intensity in his dark eyes. He wore dusty trail clothes, a worn leather vest over a blue shirt, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced down death more than once and lived to tell about it. "Well now," the auctioneer said, his interest clearly piqued. "That is a serious bid." "Can anyone match 250? The rancher scowled, studying the newcomer with obvious calculation. The cowboy met his gaze evenly, one hand resting casually near the pistol at his hip, though he made no threatening move. It was enough. The rancher looked away first, muttering under his breath. "Going once at 250, the auctioneer called. "Going twice." He paused dramatically. "Sold to the gentleman in the back for $250. Relief flooded through Beatrice so powerfully she nearly collapsed. The cowboy pushed through the crowd, pulling a thick roll of bills from his pocket. He counted out the money carefully, handing it to the auctioneer, who bit several of the bills to verify they were genuine before nodding in satisfaction. "Pleasure doing business," the auctioneer said, producing a crumpled bill of sale. "Just need your mark here and the girl is yours." The cowboy took the paper, glanced at it once, then did something Beatrice would remember for the rest of her life. He tore the bill cleanly in half, then in half again, letting the pieces flutter to the ground like broken promises. "She does not belong to anyone," he said quietly, but every person in that square heard him. "Least of all me." The auctioneer's face purpled with rage. "Now see here, that is a legal document. You cannot just—" "I just did." The cowboy's hand moved to his gun, not drawing it but making his position abundantly clear. "Anyone got a problem with that?" Silas Vetch pushed forward from where he had been counting his money. "That girl owes me a debt. I got papers proving it." "Your papers are as fake as your honor," the cowboy replied. "I know what you do, Vetch. Everyone knows. You drug travelers, forge debts, then sell them before they can get word to any authorities. Well, it ends today. This woman walks free." "You are making a powerful enemy, stranger," Vetch hissed. "Get in line." The cowboy turned his back on the man, dismissing him entirely, and walked toward the platform where Beatrice still stood shackled. He climbed the steps and produced a small key he must have lifted from the auctioneer's pocket during the exchange. His fingers were surprisingly gentle as he unlocked the iron restraints, and when they fell away, Beatrice found herself staring into eyes the color of strong coffee. "Can you walk?" he asked softly. "Yes," she managed, though her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Then let us get you out of here." He offered his arm, a gesture so courteous and unexpected that tears finally did spring to her eyes. She took it, feeling the solid strength beneath the worn fabric of his sleeve, and let him guide her down the steps. The crowd parted before them, though Beatrice felt their stares burning into her back. She kept her head high, matching the cowboy's steady pace as they crossed the square toward where a beautiful buckskin horse stood tied to a hitching post, its coat gleaming gold in the afternoon sun. "Can you ride?" the cowboy asked. "Yes, though it has been some time." "Good enough." He untied the horse and helped her up into the saddle with easy strength, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her to grip the reins, and Beatrice felt safer than she had in weeks, surrounded by his solid presence. They rode out of Sheridan at a measured pace, not running but not dawdling either. No one tried to stop them. Once they cleared the edge of town and hit the open range, the cowboy urged the horse into a smooth canter that ate up the miles between them, and whatever vengeance Silas Vetch might be plotting, Beatrice finally found her voice. "Why did you do that? You spent a fortune and then you destroyed the bill. You could have—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Could have what? Kept you?" His voice held a note of disgust. "I am not in the market for slaves, miss. What Vetch was doing back there, that is an abomination. Nobody deserves to be sold like property. Still, $250. That is a small fortune. Money comes and goes. I have been saving my wages for a while now, figured I would buy some land eventually. But I reckon my land can wait until a better opportunity comes along." A woman's freedom seemed like a better investment today. Beatrice felt tears tracking down her cheeks now, the shock and terror and relief all catching up to her at once. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you. No need for thanks. Any decent man would have done the same." "We both know that is not true," Beatrice said, thinking of all the faces in that crowd, all the men who had bid on her like she was livestock. "What is your name?" "Lynn Reardon, madam. I worked for the Double Bar Ranch about 30 miles south of here. Finished my contract last week. Beatrice Morgan. I was traveling to California with my father, but he died of fever 3 weeks back. I made it as far as Sheridan before my money ran out." She paused. "Where are we going now?" Flynn was quiet for a moment, and Beatrice could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing against her back. "There is a small settlement about 20 miles east of here, place called Clearwater Creek. They have a boarding house run by a respectable widow named Mrs. Chen. I was planning to head that direction anyway, thought I might look for work in that area. I can get you there safely, and Mrs. Chen will help you figure out your next steps. She is good people." "I have no money," Beatrice admitted, shame coloring her words. "Nothing at all. Vetch took everything." "We will figure something out. Maybe Mrs. Chen needs help at the boarding house. Maybe one of the families in Clearwater needs a teacher or a seamstress. You read and write?" "Yes, my mother insisted on a thorough education." "Then you have got skills worth more than gold out here. Half the settlers cannot read their own supply orders. You will be fine, Miss Morgan." His confidence was reassuring, but Beatrice still felt adrift, her entire life reduced to the clothes on her back and the kindness of a stranger. Still, as they rode across the rolling grassland with the mountains rising purple in the distance, she felt something stirring in her chest that might have been hope. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady hoofbeats and the wind whispering through the dry grass. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Beatrice had never paid much attention to sunsets back in Philadelphia, but out here they seemed impossibly vast, as if the sky itself had no limits. "We should stop soon and make camp," Flynn said eventually. "Still a good ways to Clearwater Creek, and I would rather not push the horse too hard in this heat. There is a creek about another mile ahead with some cottonwood trees. We can rest there for the night." Beatrice felt a flutter of nervousness. She was alone with a strange man in the middle of the wilderness, no matter how kindly he had acted. Flynn seemed to sense her tension because he added, "You will have your privacy, Miss Morgan. I will keep a respectable distance. You have my word on that." "I trust you," Beatrice said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. They reached the creek as the sun touched the horizon, and it was as beautiful a spot as Flynn had promised. The cottonwoods provided shade and shelter, and the water ran clear and cold over smooth stones. Flynn helped Beatrice down from the horse, then set about making camp with the easy efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. He built a small fire, filled a pot with creek water for coffee, and produced jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. It was not much of a meal, but Beatrice's stomach growled at the sight of it nonetheless. She had not eaten since the previous evening. "Here," Flynn said, handing her the larger portion. "Not fancy, but it will keep you going." They ate in companionable silence as the stars began to emerge overhead, brilliant and uncountable. Beatrice had never seen so many stars. The city lights of Philadelphia had hidden them, but out here they blazed like diamonds scattered across black velvet. "Tell me about Philadelphia," Flynn said after a while, his voice quiet in the gathering darkness. "What was your life like before?" Beatrice considered the question, wrapping her arms around her knees. "Ordinary, I suppose. My father was a clerk at a shipping company. We had a small house on a respectable street. My mother died 2 years ago of consumption, and after that, my father became restless. He talked constantly of the West, of opportunity and fresh starts. Finally, he sold everything and bought passage on the train. I thought he was chasing a dream, but now I wonder if he was just running from grief." "Grief has a way of following you wherever you go," Flynn observed. "You sound like you speak from experience." Flynn poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the night. "Lost my parents young to cholera. Bounced around between relatives who did not particularly want another mouth to feed. Struck out on my own when I was 15, been working ranches ever since. That was 8 years ago. So you are 23, Beatrice calculated, last month. You. 21. My birthday was in April." They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that can only exist between two people who have already seen each other at their most vulnerable. Beatrice watched Flynn in the firelight, noting the way shadows played across his features, the strength in his hands, the gentleness in his eyes when he looked at her. "Why did you really do it?" she asked suddenly. "Save me, I mean. Most men would have walked away." Flynn met her gaze across the fire. "Because it was the right thing to do. And because I saw the way you held your head up on that platform, even with those shackles on your wrists. You reminded me of a wild horse I saw once, captured and corralled but not broken. Some things are too precious to be owned." Beatrice felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "That is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever said to me. I just speak truth as I see it." Flynn stood, brushing dust from his pants. "You should get some sleep, Miss Morgan. We have a long ride tomorrow. I will take the first watch." "Watch for what?" "Probably nothing, but Vetch struck me as the type to hold a grudge. Rather be cautious." The reminder of danger sent a chill through Beatrice despite the warm evening air. She had been so caught up in the moment that she had almost forgotten the threat they had left behind in Sheridan. She settled near the fire, using her arm as a pillow, and watched Flynn position himself against a cottonwood tree, his rifle across his lap. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was slow in coming. Every sound made her start, every rustle in the grass or splash in the creek. But eventually, lulled by the crackling fire and the sense of safety that came from Flynn's watchful presence, she drifted off. She woke once in the deep hours of night to find Flynn still awake, his gaze scanning the darkness beyond their small circle of firelight. Their eyes met, and he gave her a slight nod of reassurance. Beatrice closed her eyes again and slept more soundly than she had since her father's death. Morning came with the songs of meadowlarks and the smell of coffee boiling over the fire. Beatrice sat up, disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was. Flynn was crouched by the creek, splashing water on his face, and in the clear morning light he looked younger than he had the day before, though the shadows under his eyes spoke of a sleepless night. "Morning," he called when he saw her stirring. "Coffee is ready if you want some." Beatrice joined him by the fire, accepting the tin cup he offered. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it chased away the last cobwebs of sleep. Flynn broke out more hardtack and jerky for breakfast, apologizing for the poor fare. "Once we reach Clearwater Creek, I will buy you a proper meal," he promised. "You have already spent far too much money on my account," Beatrice protested. "Then consider it an investment in a new friendship," Flynn said with a slight smile, and Beatrice's heart did an odd little flip at the warmth in his expression. They broke camp efficiently, scattering the fire and erasing evidence of their presence. Flynn helped Beatrice back onto his horse, and once again they rode with his arms around her, heading east toward a future that felt impossibly uncertain yet somehow full of promise. The landscape changed as they rode, the dry grassland giving way to rolling hills dotted with pine trees. They passed a few scattered homesteads, settlers trying to carve out lives in this harsh but beautiful country, and each time Flynn waved in greeting, his manner friendly but not inviting conversation that would slow them down. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horse and refill their canteen at a small spring. Beatrice took the opportunity to wash her face and hands, feeling more human after scrubbing away some of the dust and grime. When she returned to where Flynn was checking the horse's hooves, he looked up and his expression shifted to something she could not quite read. "You clean up nice," he said, then seemed to catch himself. "I mean, not that you looked bad before, just, well." He trailed off, color rising in his tan cheeks. Beatrice found herself laughing for the first time in weeks. "Thank you, I think. Flynn grinned, shaking his head at his own awkwardness. I have spent too much time with cows, forgotten how to talk to actual people. You are doing fine, Beatrice assured him. Better than fine. You saved my life yesterday, remember? Hard to forget. Flynn's expression grew serious again. Miss Morgan, when we get to Clearwater Creek, Mrs. Chen is going to ask questions. I think we should tell her the truth. She will help you, and she will keep your story quiet if needed, but you deserve to have someone on your side who knows what happened. What about you? Beatrice asked. Will you be on my side? For as long as you need me to be, Flynn said quietly, and the sincerity in his voice made Beatrice's chest tighten with emotion. They reached Clearwater Creek in the late afternoon, riding into a settlement that was larger and more established than Beatrice had expected. A main street boasted a general store, a blacksmith, a small church, and several other businesses, all built of sturdy timber rather than the hastily constructed false fronts she had seen in other frontier towns. People moved about their business with purpose, and she noticed several Chinese families among the residents, which explained the unusual name of the boarding house proprietor. The boarding house itself was a two-story building painted white with green shutters, flower boxes in the windows spilling over with blooming petunias. It looked like something transplanted from a gentler, more civilized place, and Beatrice felt a rush of homesickness at the sight. Flynn dismounted and helped Beatrice down, then tied his horse to the rail out front. Let me do the talking at first, he said quietly. Mrs. Chen knows me a little. I passed through here a few times when I was working at the double bar. They climbed the steps to the wide front porch, and Flynn knocked on the door. It opened almost immediately to reveal a small Chinese woman in her 50s, her black hair streaked with silver and pulled back in a neat bun. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent, missing nothing as she took in Flynn and then Beatrice in her torn, dusty dress. Flynn Reardon, she said, her English accented but perfectly clear. I did not expect to see you again so soon, and you have brought a guest. Good afternoon, Mrs. Chen. This is Miss Beatrice Morgan. She has had some trouble and is in need of help. May we come in? Mrs. Chen stepped aside without hesitation. Of course. Come sit. You both look like you could use tea and a good meal. The interior of the boarding house was as neat and welcoming as the exterior, with polished wood floors, lace curtains, and furniture that spoke of care and pride. Mrs. Chen led them to a small sitting room and gestured for them to sit while she disappeared into what must be the kitchen. She returned moments later with a tray bearing a teapot, cups, and a plate of cookies that smelled of ginger and honey. As she poured, Flynn explained what had happened in Sheridan, leaving out no detail of Silas Vetch's treachery or the auction. Mrs. Chen's expression grew darker with each word, and when Flynn described tearing up the bill of sale, she nodded approvingly. You did the right thing, she said firmly. That Vetch is poison. He has done this before, though no one has been able to prove it enough to involve the territorial marshal. The girl before you, she looked at Beatrice with sympathy. She was not so lucky. Ended up in a brothel in Cheyenne before anyone could help her. Beatrice shuddered, knowing how close she had come to a similar fate. I need work, she said, finding her voice. I can read and write. I can sew, cook, keep house. I am a hard worker, Mrs. Chen. I just need a chance. Mrs. Chen studied her thoughtfully. Can you keep books? I need someone to help manage the accounts for the boarding house and also for my late husband's store. The general store down the street, I inherited it when he passed 5 years ago, but numbers were never my strength. The current clerk is honest but not skilled with figures. Yes, Beatrice said eagerly. My father was a shipping clerk. He taught me bookkeeping. Then you have a job if you want it. Room and board plus a small salary. Not much, but enough to save a little if you are careful. Relief flooded through Beatrice so powerfully she felt lightheaded. "Thank you. Thank you so much." "Thank Flynn," Mrs. Chen said, smiling at the cowboy. "He is the one who brought you to the right place. And you, Flynn Reardon, I suppose you are looking for work too, if you know of any. The Callahan Ranch just north of here is hiring. They run cattle and horses, good operation. The foreman is a fair man. I can send word that you are interested." "I would appreciate that, madam." Mrs. Chen stood, brushing her hands on her apron. "Good. Then that is settled. Miss Morgan, come with me and I will show you to your room and find you some proper clothes. Flynn, there is a room ready for you as well if you want to stay the night before heading to the Callahan place. On the house, as thanks for bringing Miss Morgan to me safely." Flynn looked like he wanted to protest the charity, but Mrs. Chen silenced him with a raised hand. "Some things are not about money, young man. They are about doing what is right. You understand that, I think." "Yes, madam," Flynn agreed quietly. Beatrice followed Mrs. Chen upstairs to a small but charming room with a window overlooking the street. A bed with a colorful quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin and pitcher, a wardrobe, and a small writing desk comprised the furnishings. It was simple, but after the horrors of the past day, it looked like paradise. Mrs. Chen produced a dress from the wardrobe, blue cotton with tiny white flowers. "This belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to San Francisco. You are about her size. Take it, and there are underthings in the bottom drawer. Wash up, rest if you need to. Supper is at 6, Mrs. Chen. I do not know how to thank you." The older woman patted her hand gently. "You survive, you build a new life, you become happy. That is all the thanks I need. This country is hard on women, Miss Morgan, harder than it is on men. We have to help each other." After Mrs. Chen left, Beatrice stood alone in the room, almost afraid to believe this was real. She poured water into the basin and washed thoroughly, scrubbing away the last traces of Sheridan and that terrible platform. Then she dressed in the borrowed clothes, which fit remarkably well, and brushed out her tangled hair with a brush she found in the wardrobe. When she looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, she barely recognized the woman looking back. Not the terrified victim being sold in a public square, but someone who might actually have a future. A knock at the door made her turn. "Yes, it is Flynn. Can I talk to you for a minute?" Beatrice opened the door to find the cowboy looking uncomfortable, hat in hand. He had cleaned up too, she noticed, his hair still damp from washing. "I am heading to the Callahan Ranch in the morning," he said. "I wanted to say goodbye properly and to make sure you are settled all right." "I am more than all right thanks to you," Beatrice said. "But Flynn, you are not leaving tomorrow, are you? Mrs. Chen said you could stay tonight." "Yes, but I should get to the ranch early, see about that job. Will you come back to visit?" The words came out before Beatrice could stop them, and she felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment. "I mean, Clearwater Creek is not that far from the Callahan Ranch, is it?" Flynn's expression softened. "About 5 miles. I reckon I could find reasons to come to town pretty regular. Mrs. Chen makes the best dumplings this side of the Mississippi, for one thing." "Just for the dumplings?" Beatrice asked, surprised by her own boldness. "Well," Flynn said slowly, his dark eyes holding hers, "I might want to check on a friend, make sure she is doing all right in her new situation. I think your friend would like that very much." They stood there in the doorway, the moment stretching between them charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Finally, Flynn cleared his throat. "I should let you rest before supper. I will see you downstairs." "Yes," Beatrice agreed, and watched him walk away down the hall before closing her door and leaning against it, her heart racing. Supper that evening was a revelation. Mrs. Chen had prepared a feast by frontier standards. Roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, vegetables from her garden, and a pie made with dried apples. There were 3 other boarders at the table, all men who worked various jobs in town, and they were respectful and friendly, treating Beatrice like a lady rather than a curiosity. Flynn sat beside her, and she was acutely aware of his presence, the way his arm occasionally brushed hers when he reached for something, the sound of his laugh when one of the other men told a joke. When the meal ended and the other boarders dispersed to their evening activities, Flynn and Beatrice found themselves alone on the front porch, watching the sun set over the hills. Strange how quickly life can change, Beatrice mused. Yesterday I thought my life was over. Tonight I have a job, a safe place to live, and, she paused, glancing at Flynn, and a friend. Strangest 24 hours of my life too, Flynn admitted, but I would not change any of it. Well, maybe the part where you had to go through that terror in Sheridan. But everything after that has been good. Flynn, that money you spent, $250, that is years of savings. I will earn more. He turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. Beatrice, money is just money. But you, standing up there with your head held high even when you were terrified, refusing to let them break you, that was something worth more than any pile of coins. I could not walk away from that. I could not walk away from you. Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes again, but they were good tears this time. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you are brave and strong and kind. I know you loved your father enough to follow him into the unknown. I know you have the courage to start over with nothing but borrowed clothes and the charity of strangers. That is plenty to know. I want to know you too, Beatrice said softly. Really know you, not just the heroic cowboy who saved my life. I want to know what you dream about, what makes you laugh, what scares you. Flynn smiled, that same slight upward curve of his lips that made her heart skip. I reckon we will have time for that. I am not going anywhere, Beatrice. Not anymore. I have been drifting from ranch to ranch for 8 years, never staying in one place long because no place felt like home. But here now with you. He paused, seeming to gather courage. This feels like somewhere I could put down roots. Because of the dumplings, Beatrice teased gently. Because of you, Flynn said simply, and the honesty in his voice took her breath away. They sat together on that porch until full dark, talking about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their pasts and tentative hopes for their futures. When Mrs. Chen finally appeared to remind them that respectable boarders did not stay up until all hours, Beatrice went to bed with a smile on her face and warmth in her heart. Flynn left early the next morning before Beatrice woke, but he left a note pushed under her door that simply read, "See you Sunday." Sunday. 3 days away. Beatrice found herself counting the hours. True to Mrs. Chen's word, the work at the general store was challenging but rewarding. The books were in disarray, years of approximate record-keeping having created a tangle that required patience and skill to unravel. Beatrice threw herself into the task, finding comfort in the orderly world of numbers and accounts. The store clerk, a friendly young man named Peter, was grateful for her help and proved a willing teacher about the specifics of frontier commerce. The town embraced her with surprising warmth. Mrs. Chen, it turned out, was a respected figure in Clearwater Creek, and anyone she vouched for was accepted without question. Beatrice found herself invited to the church social, included in the women's sewing circle, and greeted by name when she walked down the street. On Sunday morning, she took extra care with her appearance, wearing another of Mrs. Chen's daughter's dresses, this one a soft green that brought out the color of her eyes. She told herself it had nothing to do with Flynn's promised visit, but when she saw him riding up the street just after noon, her heart leaped in a way that made lying to herself impossible. He had cleaned up, she noticed, wearing a newer shirt and pants that were not covered in trail dust. When he dismounted and caught sight of her on the porch, his face lit up with a smile that made the 3-day wait worthwhile. "Miss Morgan," he greeted her formally, though his eyes were warm. "You look lovely." "Thank you. How is the Callahan Ranch?" "Good. Real good. The foreman hired me on the spot, and the work is honest. Fair wages, decent bunkhouse. They run a quality operation." He paused, suddenly looking uncertain. "I was wondering if you might like to take a walk with me. There is a pretty spot by the creek where folks sometimes picnic." "I would like that very much." They strolled through town at a leisurely pace, Flynn leading his horse rather than leaving it tied in front of the boarding house. People nodded greetings as they passed, and Beatrice saw more than one knowing smile directed their way. Small towns loved a romance, and apparently she and Flynn were providing entertainment. The spot by the creek was indeed beautiful, a shaded bend where the water pooled deep and clear, surrounded by willows and wildflowers. Flynn tied his horse where it could graze and then helped Beatrice settle on a flat rock near the water's edge. "I thought about you every day," he admitted once they were seated. "Wondered if you were all right, if you liked the work, if you were happy." "I thought about you too," Beatrice confessed. "Mrs. Chen says you are welcome to Sunday dinner anytime. I think she has decided to adopt you." Flynn laughed. "She told me the same thing, said I looked too thin and needed a woman's cooking." His expression grew more serious. "Beatrice, I know it has only been a few days since we met, and I know the circumstances were strange, but I cannot stop thinking about you, about us. Is that wrong?" "No," Beatrice said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "It is not wrong at all. I feel the same way." "You do?" Flynn sounded almost surprised. "How could I not? You saved me, Flynn, not just from that auction, but from despair. You gave me hope when I had none left. You made me believe I could have a future worth living." "You would have found your way without me," Flynn said. "You are too strong to stay down." "Maybe, but it would have been so much harder, and I would not have found you." Beatrice reached out, taking his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm and the strength in his fingers. "I do not believe in fate, Flynn, but I believe we found each other for a reason." Flynn lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I have never been good with fancy words, Beatrice, but I want you to know that I am serious about this, about you. I know I am just a cowboy with no property and few prospects, but I am a hard worker and I am honest, and I would spend every day trying to make you happy if you would let me." "You are not just a cowboy," Beatrice said fiercely. "You are the best man I have ever known." "And yes, Flynn Reardon, I would very much like to see where this leads." The kiss that followed was soft and sweet, full of promise rather than passion, a beginning rather than a destination. When they broke apart, both were smiling, and the future suddenly seemed full of possibility. Over the following weeks, Flynn became a fixture in Beatrice's life and in Clearwater Creek. He came to town every Sunday without fail, spending the day with Beatrice and sharing dinner with Mrs. Chen. Sometimes they walked by the creek. Sometimes they attended church services together. And once Flynn borrowed a wagon and took Beatrice on a proper picnic up into the hills where the view stretched for miles. Beatrice thrived in her work at the general store, her skill with numbers and her friendly manner making her popular with the customers. Peter taught her about inventory management and ordering supplies, and soon she was handling aspects of the business that went far beyond simple bookkeeping. Mrs. Chen, pleased with Beatrice's success, raised her salary and began talking about making her a partner in the store someday. Flynn, meanwhile, impressed the owners of the Callahan Ranch with his skill and work ethic. Within 2 months, he was promoted to assistant foreman, a position that came with better pay and a small cabin of his own rather than a bunk in the shared quarters. As summer faded into autumn, the relationship between Beatrice and Flynn deepened from friendship into something more profound. They talked about everything, sharing their hopes and fears, their past sorrows and future dreams. Beatrice told him about her mother's long illness, the helpless feeling of watching someone she loved waste away. Flynn shared memories of his lonely childhood, bouncing between relatives who saw him as a burden. "That is why you saved me," Beatrice realized one Sunday in late September as they sat by the creek watching the leaves turn gold. "You know what it feels like to be unwanted." "Maybe," Flynn admitted. "Or maybe I just saw someone worth saving and could not walk away." "I am glad you did not walk away," Beatrice said softly. "I love you, Flynn. I think I have loved you since the moment you tore up that bill and told the world I did not belong to anyone." Flynn pulled her close, his arms strong and warm around her. "I love you too, Beatrice. Have since I first saw you standing on that platform with fire in your eyes. I want to marry you if you will have me. I know I should probably wait longer, court you proper for a year or more like respectable folks do, but I am tired of waiting to start my life. I want to start it with you." "Yes," Beatrice said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." The wedding took place in November, in the small church in Clearwater Creek, with Mrs. Chen standing as Beatrice's witness and the Callahan Ranch foreman standing for Flynn. Beatrice wore a dress that Mrs. Chen and the women of the sewing circle had made together, white silk with delicate embroidery and lace at the collar and cuffs. Flynn wore a new suit, dark and sober and properly formal, though he could not stop grinning through the ceremony. After the wedding, there was a celebration at the boarding house with food and music and dancing. The entire town seemed to turn out, filling Mrs. Chen's dining room and spilling out onto the porch and yard. Beatrice danced until her feet ached, passed from partner to partner, but her favorite dances were always with Flynn, who held her like she was something precious. When the party finally wound down and the guests departed, Flynn took his bride back to the cabin at the Callahan Ranch. It was small but sturdy, one main room with a sleeping loft, a fireplace and windows that looked out over the rolling rangeland. Flynn had spent weeks preparing it, adding furniture he had made himself, curtains he had bought in town, a rug for the floor. He carried Beatrice over the threshold, and she laughed with pure joy at the gesture. Their wedding night was tender and sweet. Two people who had found each other against impossible odds now joined together in every way that mattered. Afterward, lying wrapped in Flynn's arms with the firelight casting dancing shadows on the walls, Beatrice felt a contentment she had never imagined possible. "What are you thinking?" Flynn asked, his voice drowsy. "That I am happy," Beatrice said simply. "Truly, deeply happy. A few months ago I was being sold like property, and now I am married to the man I love, living in a home of our own. It seems impossible." "Life has a way of surprising us," Flynn murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay this happy." "I believe you will," Beatrice said, and drifted off to sleep with a smile on her face. Their first winter together was hard but joyful. The work at the ranch did not stop for cold weather, and there were mornings when Flynn left before dawn and returned after dark, exhausted and half frozen. But he always came home to a warm cabin and a hot meal, to Beatrice's smile and loving arms, and that made every hardship worthwhile. Beatrice continued her work at the general store, though she cut back her hours slightly to focus on making their cabin a true home. She sewed curtains and quilts, learned to bake bread in the temperamental wood stove, planted an herb garden that would come up in spring. Mrs. Chen visited often, bringing supplies and advice and affection, having become the mother figure Beatrice had lost. In February, During a brief thaw between winter storms, Beatrice realized her monthly courses had not come in some time. She waited another week to be sure, then shared the news with Flynn one evening over dinner. "I am with child," she said simply, watching his face. Flynn went very still, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Then he set it down carefully, his eyes finding hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "You are certain as I can be. Mrs. Chen says the signs are there." Flynn was around the table in an instant, pulling her into his arms, his face buried in her hair. "A baby," he whispered. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Beatrice asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy?" Flynn pulled back to look at her, and she saw tears on his cheeks. "Beatrice, I am beyond happy. I never thought I would have a family of my own, and now I have you and soon a child. It is more than I ever dreamed of." The pregnancy was not easy. Beatrice was sick most mornings through the spring, and by summer she was uncomfortably large and awkward. But Flynn was attentive and patient, rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings, helping her with tasks that had become difficult, making her laugh when she felt miserable. The Callahan family, who owned the ranch, were generous and understanding. They gave Flynn time off when Beatrice needed him, and Mrs. Callahan herself visited with advice and baby clothes saved from when her own children were small. In late August, on a hot afternoon when the grasshoppers sang in the fields, Beatrice went into labor. Mrs. Chen came to help, along with the doctor from town, and Flynn paced outside the cabin wearing a trail in the dirt. After 10 hours of hard labor, just as the sun was setting, a baby's cry filled the cabin. Flynn was called inside to find Beatrice exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "A son," she said softly. "We have a son, Flynn." Flynn approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny red face of his child. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was wailing with impressive volume. "He has got good lungs," Flynn said, his voice thick with emotion. "Would you like to hold him?" Flynn took his son with careful hands, cradling him against his chest. The baby quieted almost immediately, seeming to sense his father's presence. "Hello there, little one," Flynn murmured. "I am your papa. I am going to take care of you and your mama and keep you both safe forever." Beatrice smiled, tears of joy and exhaustion streaming down her face. What should we name him? They had discussed names for months, but now that the baby was real and present, Flynn found only one name felt right. "What about Franklin, after your father?" Beatrice caught her breath. "You would do that. He brought you west even though it cost him his life. He gave me the greatest gift I could ever receive. It seems right to honor him." "Franklin Reardon," Beatrice tested the name. "I like it. Franklin Joseph Reardon after both our fathers." And so Franklin Joseph Reardon entered the world, loved and wanted and celebrated. Mrs. Chen threw a party to welcome him, and half the town came bearing gifts and good wishes. The baby thrived, growing strong and healthy, and watching Flynn with their son made Beatrice fall in love with her husband all over again. Flynn was a natural father, patient and loving despite his initial nervousness. He would walk the floor with Franklin when the baby was fussy, singing old cowboy songs in his rumbling voice until the child fell asleep. He built a cradle with his own hands, carved with intricate patterns, and a rocking horse for when Franklin was older. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Flynn continued to rise at the Callahan Ranch, eventually becoming foreman when the previous one retired. The position came with a larger house, and they moved into it when Franklin was 2 and Beatrice was pregnant with their second child. Their daughter was born in spring, an easier birth than Franklin's had been. They named her Catherine, after Flynn's mother, and she had her father's dark eyes and her mother's golden hair. Flynn declared her the prettiest baby in Wyoming territory, and Beatrice could not argue. With Flynn's promotions came more financial security. They were able to save money, to make improvements to their home, to provide for their children in ways neither had been provided for in their own childhoods. But more than material comfort, they had love, a deep and abiding affection that only grew stronger with time. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Flynn surprised Beatrice with a deed. "What is this?" she asked, unfolding the official document. "Land," Flynn said, unable to hide his pride. 40 acres just east of town. "I have been saving since we got married, and Mr. Callahan helped me negotiate a good price. I want to build us a ranch of our own, Beatrice. Not right away. We have got a few more years before I will have saved enough to get started proper, but someday this will be ours." Beatrice threw her arms around him, the deed crumpling between them. "We have come so far," she said. "Do you ever think about that day in Sheridan?" "Sometimes," Flynn admitted. "And every time I thank God I happened to be passing through that town on that day. Best $250 I ever spent." "Best money you ever wasted, you mean? You tore up the bill of sale, remember?" Flynn grinned. "Best money I ever spent proving a point then. Worth every penny to see the look on Vetch's face." "Whatever happened to him?" Beatrice wondered. "I have not thought about him in years. Last I heard, the territorial marshal finally got enough evidence to bring charges. He is in prison in Cheyenne and likely to stay there for a long time. He cannot hurt anyone else." "Good," Beatrice said fiercely. "I hope he rots there." Flynn pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "He is the past, Beatrice. We are the future. Him and that auction and all of it, that is just a bad memory now. What matters is what we have built together." "You are right," Beatrice agreed, "though I cannot quite regret it, you know. If none of that had happened, I never would have met you. Then I suppose we owe a strange sort of thanks to fate for bringing us together even through darkness." As their children grew, Beatrice told them the story of how their parents met, though she softened some of the harsher details for young ears. She wanted them to understand that sometimes good things could come from terrible circumstances, that courage and kindness could change the course of a life. Franklin grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning. Catherine was wild and fearless, always climbing trees and catching frogs and begging her father to teach her to ride. They both adored their parents and the life they had built in Clearwater Creek. When Franklin was 8 and Catherine 6, their youngest sibling arrived, another boy they named Thomas. By then, Flynn had left the Callahan Ranch and started his own operation on the 40 acres he had purchased. It was hard work building from nothing, but with Beatrice's business sense and Flynn's ranching knowledge, they made it work. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. They started with a small herd of cattle and a few horses, gradually expanding as profits allowed. Beatrice kept the books, managed supplies and sales, and raised their children. Flynn worked the land from sunup to sundown, hiring help when he could afford it, doing everything himself when he could not. Through it all, their love remained constant. They still walked by the creek on Sunday afternoons when work allowed. They still sat on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over land that was theirs. They still reached for each other in the night, finding comfort and passion in familiar arms. Mrs. Chen remained a fixture in their lives, a beloved grandmother to their children, a trusted advisor and friend. She eventually sold the general store, claiming she was too old for such work, though everyone knew she was barely 60 and sharp as ever. She lived in her boarding house, taking in travelers and strays, continuing to mother anyone who needed it. On the 20th anniversary of that terrible day in Sheridan when Beatrice had stood on an auction block, She and Flynn rode out to their land just to look at what they had built. The ranch was thriving now, a proper operation with a sturdy house, a barn, outbuildings, and pastures filled with healthy livestock. Their 3 children were all in school, learning and growing. They had friends, respect, and security. "I was so scared that day," Beatrice said, sitting beside Flynn on the porch rail looking out over their domain. "I thought my life was over." "It was," Flynn said. "That old life, the one where you were alone and lost, it ended that day. And a new life began, one where you were free and loved and home." "We both found home," Beatrice corrected. "You were drifting just as much as I was, just in a different way. True enough. We found home in each other." Beatrice leaned against her husband's solid shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and hay and the soap he used. "If you could go back, knowing everything that would happen, would you still do it? Spend that money, tear up that bill, take on a stranger's burden?" Flynn did not hesitate, in a heartbeat, every time, 1,000 times over. He turned to face her, his dark eyes full of the same intensity she had seen that first day. "You were never a burden, Beatrice. You were a blessing. You still are." They kissed there on the porch as the sun set. 2 people who had found each other in the unlikeliest of circumstances and built something beautiful from ashes and courage. Their children's laughter drifted from inside the house, and smoke rose from the chimney, and everything was exactly as it should be. As the stars began to emerge overhead, brilliant against the darkening sky, Beatrice thought about the girl she had been, terrified and shackled and sold. That girl was gone, transformed into a woman who was strong and free and loved beyond measure. It had been a long journey from that auction block to this porch, from despair to joy, from loneliness to belonging. But it had been worth every step, every struggle, every moment of doubt. Because it had led her here, to Flynn, to their children, to a life richer than any she could have imagined. "I love you," she whispered into the gathering darkness. "I love you too," Flynn replied, his arms tightening around her. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that. For the rest of our lives and beyond." And there on their land, under the vast Wyoming sky, with their family gathered close and their future stretching bright before them, Beatrice knew that some stories, even those that begin in the darkest places, can have the happiest of endings. Their story, born from courage and sealed with love, would endure for generations, a testament to the truth that freedom cannot be bought or sold, only cherished and protected by those brave enough to fight for it. The years continued to roll by, each one adding depth and richness to their lives. Franklin went on to study law, becoming a voice for justice in the territory, inspired by his parents' story. Catherine married a neighboring rancher and started her own family, her wild spirit never quite tamed, but channeled into fierce love for her children. Thomas took over the family ranch, expanding it with the same determination and skill his father had shown. Flynn and Beatrice grew old together, their love deepening rather than fading with time. They sat on their porch through countless sunsets, holding hands like newlyweds, sharing stories and dreams and comfortable silences. Their grandchildren played in the yard where their own children had played, the sound of laughter echoing across land that had been won through courage and sustained through love. And when people asked, as they often did, how they had met, Beatrice would smile and tell the truth about a terrible day in Sheridan when she had been sold to the highest bidder, and a cowboy had outbid them all and tore up the bill, declaring that no person could be owned. She told of kindness when she needed it most, of courage that changed everything, of love that grew from the darkest soil into something beautiful and eternal. It was a story worth telling, a love worth celebrating, a life worth living. And as Flynn and Beatrice sat together in their twilight years, surrounded by the family they had created and the legacy they would leave behind, they knew that every hardship had been worth it. Every struggle had meaning because it had brought them to each other. That was the real ending, the one that mattered. Not in grand gestures or dramatic moments, but in the quiet, everyday miracle of two people who had found each other against impossible odds and chosen, every single day, to keep choosing each other. That was the story of Flynn and Beatrice Reardon. And it was a good story, the best story, the only story that mattered. And they lived it fully, completely, joyfully, until their very last days.